Hey there, it's Amy from Unmistakably You. Happy summer. I cannot even believe we're halfway through already. I'm totally in denial about that. Time is just flying. But I hope that you are doing well with your wedding plans and feeling good about everything. As always, if you have any questions or you're struggling, don't hesitate to reach out. We are here. I am here. I guess I'm using the royal we tonight. I'm here as I am every Wednesday to chat with you about some things that you may be dealing with in your wedding plans, depending on the phase that you're at. If you are planning for next year, maybe just kind of put a bookmark in this and come back to it next year when your RSVPs start coming in. If you're planning for the upcoming next couple of months, this is probably something that is topical for you right now. And so today I'd like to chat about guest seating do's and don'ts. Now, we're not talking about actual seating plans, how to, physically display your guest seating. We're not talking about place cards or escort cards. I literally just want to talk about the nitty-gritty of RSVP comes in, I seat Susie and Bob at table 1, I put Jimmy and Sally at table 2. So those are the kinds of things that require a little bit more thought than you might think, and that actually are maybe a little more stressful than you might have anticipated. So what I would always advise is that you ask for your RSVPs early-ish. So maybe like a month in advance. Your caterers are probably going to want your final numbers 1 to 2 weeks before the wedding. And that'll give you a couple of weeks to follow up with those RSVPs for any of those delinquents that didn't just, mail back the damn card, folks. We made it as easy as we could, right? So we're not talking about actually following up with RSVPs. We're just talking about what to do when those RSVPs come in and when you're putting your guests onto your floor plan. So don't hesitate. If you have a comment or a question, plug it into the comments. But the floor plan is definitely something that you're going to want to start with. So if you have a venue that has a pre-existing scale floor plan, that's wicked. If you're working with a tent company that will give you some kind of a generic idea of this is our size of tent with this number of 60-inch round tables, cool. I would always suggest starting with a scale plan if at all possible. So if you need to create that yourself, there are a couple of free resources that are great. You can go to weddingwire.com or you can go to allseated.com. Both of those have reasonably intuitive programs that you can use for free that will help you to very basically lay out your space and plug in your tables in an appropriate place. Now, the first thing you're going to want to think about are your fixed elements. So obviously, if you're working with a ballroom or a golf course or a banquet venue, you're likely going to have very little say in some of these fixed elements. So location of entrances, location of washrooms, location of bar. Now in venues, ballrooms and things like that, sometimes if it's a mobile bar, it can be moved and you have a couple of options. But generally speaking, those kinds of things are going to be fixed if you're working with a pre-existing venue. Now, if you're working with a DIY venue, like some barns or drive sheds or tents, for instance, the decision to where to put all of these things is going to fall to you. So there's definitely some thought to be put into those fixed elements if you are sort of designing the whole thing from scratch. So if you're building all of the elements and putting them all together in, a backyard on a private property, something like that. So if you have a choice of where to put your entrances, if you're, for instance, putting up a tent, I would definitely advise trying to put them on high ground, because if it gets rainy or if it's wet the week before the wedding, those high traffic areas are going to bog down and get muddy really quickly. The same thing goes for the bar. So if you have a choice of where to put your bar and you are outside on grass, try to put it again in a high spot where it's going to have good drainage so that you don't, the bar obviously is going to be a high traffic spot. So try to keep it in a place that's not going to get muddy. If you have, let's say, an indoor venue with a portable bar, I would advise you to put the bar away from the dance floor, or vice versa. If you have a portable dance floor, put the dance floor away from the bar. And the reason for that is just because people like to congregate around the bar. They will stand there, they will chat. At busy times, there will be a lineup at your bar, and you don't want that to impede your dance floor. You don't want to have to choose between people getting drinks or people dancing. You don't want your lineup to be so deep into the dance floor that there's no space for people to actually dance and have a good time. So try to keep those two elements away from each other. Washrooms, if you are, again, building a venue, if you're bringing in portable washrooms, make sure that they're well lit, make sure that they are in a space that's far away from, the fun parts of the evening, the drinking and the dancing. So think about those things. In a lot of cases, they will be fixed if you are in a specific venue. You want to put them on your floor plan, though, and make sure that you're working around them when you actually do place your guests and your wedding party and your vendors at your wedding. Now, when we're talking about placement of people, I actually want to start with your vendors, because those are realistically the people who are going to either determine the quality of your event. They're going to be the ones providing the entertainment for your event, or they're going to be the ones who are capturing the memories of your event. So you do want to give some thought to where you seat your vendors. Yes, you need to feed your vendors if they are at your wedding for any length of time. Your florist is going to drop off, set up, and take off. Your officiant more than likely is going to come in, do your ceremony, and leave. I'm talking about vendors like your planners who are on site probably longer than you are in a lot of cases. I'm talking about your photography team, your videography team, your band, or your DJ. So those vendors that are there for a long number of hours on your day are going to be the ones that you want to think about feeding. Now, if you're working in a DIY venue, a barn or a tent, and you're bringing in caterers who are not supplied by the venue, you're bringing in bartenders who are not supplied by the venue, that's a conversation you're going to want to have with the caterers and the bartenders as to whether you are responsible for feeding them, because oftentimes the catering staff or the catering team will feed their own staff. So those kinds of things you need to talk about with your caterers and bartenders. But the typical vendors that you're going to want to place on your floor plan somewhere are, like I said, planners, photography, videography, DJ, or band. If you've got a DJ, it's pretty likely that he or she is going to want to eat at his or her station, because they are going to be responsible throughout the meal for monitoring the levels of dinner music. If you've got some kind of kissing game or speeches spread throughout your meal, they're going to be responsible for controlling the mic and turning levels up and down and that kind of thing. So in most cases, they'll want to eat at their table, but be sure that you communicate with them about that and ask if they do have an assistant, whether the assistant is going to eat at the DJ booth as well, or whether they're going to be seated. In most cases, bands are not going to be playing during dinner. Now, you may have, like a live pianist or something, in which case you'll want to think about feeding that live musician either prior to or after the dinner, so that they do also get a meal if that's included in their contract. With bands, in most cases, they're not necessarily working during your dinner, so they can go and be seated in a separate space. The vendors that need to be seated at tables in your reception area are going to be your photo video team and your planners, because the photographers and videographers are going to be up and down throughout the entire meal, capturing the kissing game, taking pictures and video of speeches, making sure that they catch all of those candid moments. Your planners are going to be the ones who are up and down just doing all the things. I can't tell you the last time I sat down for more than 3.5 minutes at a stretch during a wedding meal. So make sure that you do put those vendors on your floor plan. You don't necessarily have to put them on the seating chart, although you do need to communicate with them where they're sitting. But in a perfect world, it would be a separate table where the vendors can just kind of sit and place their video photography cases and have kind of a home base. Now, if you don't have a separate table, you can certainly intersperse your vendors with the guests. But if it's possible, if you have, let's say, 2 photographers, try to put them at the same table so that they can communicate as they're working through dinner. Same thing with your planners or your videography team. I would suggest strongly that you never put your vendors in a separate room or an alcove off to the side where they don't have a direct sight line to the head table. And the reason for that is because, like I said, we're working through your meal, and the photography and videography team are up and down capturing all of the things that happen during the meal. The planners are the ones who are responsible for maintaining the flow and ensuring that things are moving smoothly and that people who are giving speeches are given adequate warning. So putting them in a separate room is going to ensure that they don't have tabs on what's happening in your reception, and it's going to really increase the likelihood that something gets missed. So don't do that unless you've talked to your vendors and they're super cool with it and you're also okay with potentially things going off the rails. Now, probably top of your mind, not your vendors, but your guests. Let's talk a little bit about guest seating. So the first thing is that you need to make sure you know what size of tables you have and how many people they can comfortably seat. Some venues have 72-inch tables, which seat 10 comfortably, and some only have 60-inch tables, which only seat 8. So don't try to put 10 people at a 60-inch round. Make sure you communicate with your venue or with your rental supplier before you do your seating plan, because I'd hate to have to see you redo it, or worse, not have space at the tables when it comes down to the actual day of the wedding. Now, there are lots of ways to play with your actual seating plan. I'm old school. I like a pen and paper, so I am inclined to write each guest's name down on an individual sticky note. You can get those little skinny flag guys, and then physically draw it out on Bristol board and move your guests around. This is where it can get a little bit more difficult than you thought it would, because maybe you have guests who don't get along and they need to stay away from each other. Or maybe you want to put your family together, but there are more than 8 family members, and where do you put the overflow? So this is the kind of thing you want to give yourself lots of time to do. When it comes to who to place at what table, I would advise you to try and keep it to groupings who are going to have something in common and who are going to be able to actually converse with each other. Maybe you put your work friends at one table and your baseball friends at a different table. Put your families at a table with their family members. If you do end up having a bunch of randoms, which you will, try, if at all possible, to fit them in with guest groupings where you think they're going to have something in common and where they actually can make conversation and not feel completely awkward like they're at the reject table. If you've got kids coming, and if they're old enough, consider putting them at their own kids' table, or even maybe providing some childcare for them so that their parents can enjoy the reception. If not, intersperse them with their parents if they obviously need to have a little bit more management, if they're really young and they need their parents to, cut up their chicken fingers for them or whatever it is. If you've got really young kids or toddlers who are going to need high chairs, communicate with the parents and ask if they're bringing something or if you need to provide something. And if you need to provide something, that's a conversation you're going to need to have with the venue. Don't just assume that they have high chairs. Now, generally speaking, with regard to family, they're going to sit closest to the head table, but this day and age, you do need to be sensitive if you have split families of those dynamics. So sometimes you need to get creative. Maybe you actually end up having 4 family tables. Maybe you only have 2. Maybe the parents all sit together. It depends totally on the dynamics of your specific families and your guests. But oftentimes you'll see them closest to the head table. Now, if you've got grandparents seated at that head table, or any elderly guest really, you're going to want to be cognizant of where your speakers are placed for your DJ or your band. I would probably have a conversation with the DJ or the band and ask if they're familiar with the venue, and if you know where they're going to be set up, ask them where their speakers will be. You're going to want to keep those away, ideally from the elderly guests, because they're going to be the ones who are going to want to potentially sit during the dance, and they're going to be constantly complaining that the music is too loud. Even during dinner, they may be asking the DJ or the band to turn it down. So be conscious of where the elderly guests are seated. You might also want to think about any pregnant guests that you have. That's something, of an age where a lot of our couples are getting married. They tend to also have a lot of friends who are having babies. And so it would be a little bit more considerate if you could seat them near a washroom, for instance. You also want to think about your MC. Try to seat your MC near the podium, because they probably will be up and down a number of times throughout the meal, and it's more convenient for them if they are near the location of the podium or the microphone. And finally, if you are in a venue that does not have space for all of your guests plus a dance floor, meaning that you'll have to set up some tables on the dance floor, if you have to do that, if it's completely unavoidable to set up tables on the dance floor, if you're doing a buffet, the ideal is to do the buffet tables on the dance floor, because they'll get broken down after dinner and then you will have an open dance floor for dancing. You just need to be mindful of the fact that you're going to have someone clean up the food scraps that inevitably will end up on the dance floor if you've had food served over top. If you're not having a buffet and you need to have guest tables on the dance floor, try your very gosh darndest to make those your friends' tables, your party animal, wild and crazy, going to be on the dance floor all night friends, because they're not going to want to sit down. If you break down grandma's table, she's probably going to be upset that she no longer has a home base. She doesn't have anywhere for her purse. She's not going to want to stand. I mean, hopefully your grandma's out on the dance floor all night. I know my grandma would not be. So be a little bit mindful of the guests that you're putting on the dance floor, and do make sure that they know in advance that their table is going to be broken down following the meal. Now, that's a whole scheduling conversation that we could have in another live, which I probably have done and will do in the past. But if you are breaking down tables, you need to schedule time to do that. It doesn't instantly happen, much to my chagrin, because it would make things flow a lot more smoothly. Now, regarding your wedding party, if you're looking towards a traditional head table, it would traditionally be basically the same way as your wedding party stands at the ceremony. So if you've got, a bride and a groom, bride and party on the left, groom and party on the right, unless it's Jewish, in which case it's flipped. If you have, if you're a same-sex couple, or if you've got any real sort of any grouping, any combination of people, doesn't matter how they stand at the ceremony. Oftentimes they will be sat the same way at the reception. There are lots and lots of variations on that. Instead of going bride side, groom side, you could mix up bride side, groom side, and you could alternate them in pairs. You, of course, could have the straight across head table. You could have a U-shaped head table. If you've got a corner, I've done lots of L-shaped head tables, or even a king's table, where it's a long table that often juts out into the middle of the guests or the middle of the dance floor, where the couple is seated at the head of the table, and then their wedding party, and sometimes their partners, depending on how much space you have, are seated along the sides. Seating partners with your wedding party is really a nice gesture, because oftentimes, you'll be the girlfriend of the best man and you won't know a single soul at the wedding, and you get put at that rando table. So if it's possible for you to seat your wedding party with their spouses or partners, that's always appreciated, but not always possible, and not always really what you want to do. You know your dynamics again, so gauge what the best and most comfortable thing for your wedding party and their partners is going to be. I also do an awful lot of sweetheart tables. So that's a nice kind of opportunity for you and your partner to just sit and have that time together while you seat your wedding party at the guest tables or with their partners. Now, just be mindful of, again, what your purpose is at the reception. So if you want to sit and have that time with your partner, awesome, do a sweetheart table. If you are of the mind that you would much rather be socializing with your guests, maybe you don't get to see them very often, maybe you're going to be up and down doing table visits, maybe a sweetheart table doesn't make as much sense. Now, ultimately, there are no wedding police, but there are definitely a few things to think about that are going to make your floor planning and your guest seating a little bit easier and a little bit more comfortable for your guests. So as always, don't hesitate. If you have questions or thoughts, reach out to me, leave me a comment here under the video, email me, amy@unmistakably.you.com. And wherever you are in your wedding planning, I hope that it's going well. Until next week, happy planning. Take care.